My wife told me I'd embarrass her if I showed up at her company's gala, so I stayed home in my dad's old recliner with a bowl of soup, and 3 weeks later, the man who runs that entire company walked into my welding shop on Fleet Avenue, took my hand in both of his, and told me he'd been looking for me for 20 years. Hey, hold on a second before I get into it. I'm glad you're here, really. Wherever you are right now, in a car, in a kitchen, folding laundry at midnight, thanks for letting me talk at you for a while. Do me a favor and put your city down in the comments, because I read every single one of them, and I'll say your name out loud in the next video, I promise. And that little, that subscribe button, that's the whole thing. That's what keeps a channel this size alive, okay? So, 3 weeks before that man walked into my shop, I was sitting at my own kitchen table with a plate of kielbasa, going cold, and a cream-colored invitation lying between us, and my wife of 11 years looked me in the face and said 3 words. "You'll embarrass me." Not angry, flat. Like she was reading a delivery estimate off a clipboard. Said I'd have grease under my fingernails, no scrubbing was ever going to fix, and every person in that room would see it. And I said, okay. That's what I said. Okay. And I ate the kielbasa cold. 3 weeks later, a 72-year-old man in a heavy overcoat stood in the middle of my shop and asked me to take off my left glove. When I did, he put both hands over his mouth. Because there's something on my left hand. Been there since I was 28. And in 11 years of marriage, 11 years of that woman holding that hand across a table, she never once asked me what it was. All of it hangs off that. So, my name's Danny. Danny Nowak. 49 years old, 2 bad knees, 1 good ear, and I run Nowak Ironworks out of a red brick building on Fleet Avenue in Slavic Village, Cleveland. My father opened it in 1978. Stanley. Everybody called him Stash. He welded railings and fire escapes and truck beds, and he smelled like slag and Old Spice. And he died in 2011 of a heart attack in the Giant Eagle parking lot on Broadway holding a bag of frozen pierogi. Burned scars on both forearms, like somebody flicked cigarettes at me for 30 years, which is basically what happened. I still eat lunch out of his green thermos, and yes, I know how that sounds. Whitney is my wife, was my wife. I still catch myself. We met in 2011, 4 months after my father died, at a bar on Professor Avenue in Tremont. 29, leasing agent, coat way too thin for November, arguing with the bartender about a check. I paid it. That's the whole story. $31 for a stranger, and 11 months later, we got married at St. Stanislaus with 60 people and my mother crying in the second row. And I loved her. God, I loved her. I'm not going to pretend I saw any of it coming. I didn't. I thought we were the boring kind of happy you don't even notice you're in. She wanted to go back to school, Cleveland State, night classes, and she was scared to ask me. She cried when she asked, sitting on the edge of the tub with her makeup running, like she thought I'd tell her she wasn't smart enough. I paid for it. Every semester, cash, out of the shop. There were a couple springs I didn't take a paycheck at all, and ate cereal for dinner and told her the shop was doing great. I'd do it again. I'm not telling you, so you feel sorry for me. I want it in your head for later. She graduated in 2016 and got hired at a firm downtown called So-Called Marsh. Big development company. They build the glass boxes, the apartment towers with the rooftop dog park, office up off East 9th, view of the lake, receptionist who I swear has never once remembered my name. I went up there exactly twice. Second time, I'm in the elevator bank holding Whitney's dry cleaning, and a young woman held the door for me and looked down at my hands and said, "Did that hurt?" Just like that. Nothing careful about it. I laughed and said, "Yeah, some." She got off on 19. Remember her? I didn't. Whitney climbed. Coordinator, manager, then director of business development, which as far as I could tell, meant she went to lunch a lot and made people say yes. And somewhere in there she started editing me. It's never one big thing you can point at. That's what nobody tells you. It's her asking me not to park the shop truck in front of the house because of the lettering on the door. It's a barbecue in Rocky River where she introduced me as Dan, and when the guy asked what I did, she said, "He's in fabrication," and changed the subject. Fabrication. Sure. I found her wedding ring in the zip pocket of her work bag in the spring of 2023. Didn't say anything. Put it back. Told myself she took it off because of the hand sanitizer. Yeah, I know. I told myself a lot of things back then. All right. Now the kitchen, properly. Thursday in March, yellow light. The window over the sink with the crack in the corner I never fixed. Whitney in her coat with her keys already in her hand, and that cream-colored envelope on the table. The gala. So-called Marsh, 40 years in business, black tie, at the Union Club on Euclid. Every partner, every client, the mayor's chief of staff, 2 names on the envelope. Hers and mine. And I said, kind of dumb about it, kind of happy about it, "So what am I supposed to wear to this thing?" She didn't look up from her phone. "You're not going." I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought it was a joke, and then I looked at her face. I said, "Whit, my name's on the invitation." She put the phone down and took the kind of breath you take before you tell somebody their dog died. "Danny, I've worked 8 years for this. 8 years. So-called name's the new senior VP by the end of the quarter, and it's between me and one other person." Okay, so? "So I need that room to see me a certain way." The refrigerator kicked on. I remember that sound. I said, "Say what you mean." And she looked right in my face, the woman I put through school, and gave me those 3 words, and then kept going another 40 seconds about my hands and the corner I'd stand in and the way I talk about the shop. I sat there in my father's kitchen chair with a fork in my hand and felt my whole chest go cold and hollow like somebody opened a door in it. She kissed the top of my head on the way out and told me not to wait up, so I didn't go. Saturday night, I sat in the recliner. My dad died owning and ate chicken soup out of the pot, and at 11:30 she came in and dropped her heels by the door, glowing, lit up, and told me the night went perfect. Perfect. That's the word she used, and honest to God, that would have been the end of it. A man in a chair feeling small, probably 1,000 of you listening right now know exactly that chair, except 2 days later it rained. Whitney's car had a bad seal on the trunk. Every time it rained, I had to pull the liner up and lay towels underneath. So Monday morning after she left, I grabbed her spare keys and opened it. There was a leather document bag back there, half unzipped, and I saw a parcel number. I've been staring at that parcel number since I was a kid. 3417 Fleet Avenue. My father's building. My building. I sat down on the back bumper in my own driveway in the rain and read a 22-page option agreement between so-called Marsh Development and Daniel S. Nowak, sole proprietor, granting them the exclusive right to buy 3417 Fleet Avenue and the 2 lots next to it for $620,000. And there was my signature, page 19, notarized, dated the 4th of February. I never signed it. I never saw it. I didn't know so-called Marsh had ever heard of Fleet Avenue. It's like missing a stair in the dark. Your body knows before your brain does. And here's the wild part. Underneath it, a second folder. Home equity line of credit, 3rd Federal, $90,000 against our house on East 71st. My signature was on that too. $90,000. Out of the house, my uncle helped me put a roof on. I stood in that driveway soaking wet, thinking about driving downtown and putting my fist through a glass wall. But I'm Stash Nowak's son, and my father used to say that when you're welding something crooked, the worst thing you can do is grab it and pull. Let it cool, then cut it clean. So I let it cool, put everything back the way it was. Bag half unzipped, towels down, trunk closed. Then I went inside and photographed my own signature off an old vehicle title and my mortgage, and I sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours comparing the loops in my letters. I'm no expert. But the Y in Nowak on that option agreement had a little curl on the tail. I don't curl anything, never have in my life. Now I've got a guy, everybody around here has a guy. Mine's Ed Palka, went to St. Michael's with me, does wills and small claims out of a storefront in Parma. Tuesday morning I brought him Patsky from Rudy's and told him what I found, and Ed took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes a long time. And Ed said, "Danny, listen to me. Don't confront her. Don't move money. Don't do one single thing that looks like panic. We go get paper." So we went and got paper. Took us 9 days. And here's what most people don't know. In Ohio, a notary keeps a journal, and a notary commission is a public record you can look up. The one who stamped my forged signature was a woman named Kendra Voss, and her commission listed her employer, So-Called Marsh Development, an admin on the 11th floor. She'd notarized my signature on a document I've never held in my hands. That was the first thread. I pulled it. The second one was easier and hurt worse. There was an old Dell in the shop office that Whitney set up in 2018 to do the books, and her email had been syncing to it for 6 years, and nobody, me included, ever thought about it once. 6 years of email. I sat in that office with the space heater going and read my wife's mail until 4 in the morning. So-Called Marsh had a project. Mixed use along Fleet, $60 million, and they'd been quietly buying parcels for 2 years through a shell company. The whole thing needed my block. My 3 lots sit in the middle of it like a bad tooth. Whitney was put on acquisitions for that project in 2022. She never told them. Never told a single person at that company that the stubborn welder who wouldn't return their letters, the guy they called the Nowak problem in 12 separate emails, was her husband. She told her team she was developing a relationship with the owner, that she was close. And she told them, I read it with my own eyes, that Nowak was erratic, drinks, and probably won't remember what he agreed to. Erratic. Drinks. I haven't had a beer since my father's funeral. And then in January of last year, she wrote to a man named Bryce Aldrich, a VP over there, and it went from work to something else about 4 emails in. I'm not going to read you all of it. Some of it's mine, and I get to keep it. But there was one line. He wrote, "Once the Fleet parcels close, we're both free. Both free." She was going to forge my name onto a sale, take the money, take the promotion, and file. There was a consultation invoice from a family law firm in Beechwood dated 11 months before I ever opened that trunk. She'd been building it in my house. I sat there in the dark with the space heater ticking, thinking about her crying on the edge of the bathtub, scared to ask me for tuition. So I've got paper. Ed put copies in a safe deposit box at 3rd Federal, and yeah, we appreciated the irony. Ed said the play is forgery and fraud, county prosecutor, lawsuit. And I said no, not because I'm noble. It wasn't noble. Because So-Called Marsh doesn't know. That company thinks it's holding an option signed by a man who never signed it. When this comes out, the first thing a company does is protect itself. And the fastest way to do that is call the seller a liar, bury it, settle it. And Whitney survives, quiet, with a payout and a reference letter. I didn't want her quiet. So I wrote a letter, longhand because my typing's bad. I wrote to the office of Gerald Sokol, founder and chief executive, and I said, in about 4 sentences, that a document bearing my signature existed regarding 3417 Fleet Avenue, that I did not sign it, that I had never spoken to anyone from his company, and if he wanted to see the property, he could come to the shop any weekday before 6. I signed it Daniel S. Nowak. No curl on the Y. I mailed it Wednesday, and then nothing. 4 days of nothing, and I unraveled a little. Burned a weld clean through a 1/4-inch plate because my hands were shaking. Whitney came home and made stuffed peppers and put her hand on my forehead like I was a kid, and I let her. You know the worst part? I still wanted her to be innocent. 90 pages of proof in a bank vault, and part of me was hoping for a phone call that explained it. The following Wednesday, 3 weeks after the gala, a black Yukon pulled up in front of my shop. The man who got out was about 72. Heavy overcoat, white hair, manila folder under his arm. He walked in the open bay door, stopped 12 feet from me, and his face went the color of a paper plate. He didn't say hello. He said, "Take off your glove." I said, "Excuse me?" He said it again, quieter. Please, take off your glove." So I pulled off my left glove and I held up my hand. And there it is. There it's been since I was 28. That long, ugly, puckered burn that runs from the base of my thumb up under the sleeve, the one where the skin's shiny and there's no hair on it. And this man in a $2,000 coat put both hands over his mouth and made a sound I've only heard from men at funerals. He said, "I've been looking for you for 20 years. And I said, "Buddy, I don't know you." And he said, "The Inner Belt, February, 2005. And I sat down on a pallet of angle iron because my legs quit. So let me back up. February of 2005. I was 28, worst ice storm in years, and I was driving my father's shop truck back from a job in Bedford around 11 at night, coming up the Inner Belt where it bends toward the bridge, and a car ahead of me touched the brakes and just went. Spun, caught the barrier, came off it, hit the median rail, and stopped upside down, and the engine caught. 4 cars stopped. Nobody got out. Hazards on, hands over their mouths. And I don't think those people were cowards, just regular people who'd never been near a fire in their lives. I'm a welder. I've been on fire before. Not the same, I know that. But I wasn't afraid of it. I got the driver's door open with a pry bar out of the truck bed. There was a man in there upside down, seat belt locked, screaming, and a little girl in the back, 7 or 8, hanging in her booster with her arms straight down over her head like she was underwater. I cut the man's belt with a shop knife. He came down on his head, and I dragged him out by the collar and put him in the snow. Then I went back for her. And here's the part I've never told anybody, not even Whitney, because it's stupid and it isn't heroic. The headliner was burning by then, and I put my left hand flat against the roof of that car to brace myself, which was now the floor, and it was metal, and it had been sitting under a burning engine, and I heard my own hand cook. I heard it. And I didn't let go, because if I let go I couldn't reach her buckle. I got her out. Carried her about 40 feet and set her down on somebody's coat. She was shaking and couldn't stop, so I took off my flannel, my dad's flannel actually, the one with the oval patch that said "Stan" over the pocket, and I put it around her and said, "Hey, kiddo, look at me. You're done. That was the worst part, and it's over." Then the fire trucks came up the ramp, and I got in my truck and left. I know. Everybody asks why. Because my father had chemo at the clinic at 7 the next morning, and I was driving him. Because the truck's plates were expired, and my hand was screaming, and I didn't want to stand in the snow for 2 hours answering questions. Because it didn't feel like a story, it felt like a Tuesday. I drove to Marymount, and they wrapped my hand, and I told them I grabbed a hot manifold. Next morning I sat with my dad while they ran the drip, and never said a word about it. Not to him, not to anybody. 20 years. And now here's an old man standing in my shop with his hands over his mouth. Gerald Sokol, the driver. The little girl was his daughter, Nina. She was 8. He told me, sitting on an overturned bucket, that he ran ads in the Plain Dealer for a year and offered a $50,000 reward and got 200 fake calls. The only physical thing he had in the world was a plaid shirt with a name patch that said Stan. So he went looking for Stanleys. And in 2009 he found a Stanley Nowak who owned a fabrication shop on Fleet Avenue. And he drove out here and sat in his car across the street for an hour and never went in, because Stanley Nowak was a 60-year-old man with a bad back, and it obviously wasn't him. He said, "It was your father's shirt." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "It never once occurred to me to ask him if he had a son." We sat in that shop 3 hours. He cried twice. I cried once, and I'm not embarrassed about it. And then, I swear I hadn't planned this, he reached for the manila folder and said, "Danny, I have to ask you about something else. There's a document." He laid the option agreement on my workbench. "Is this your signature?" I looked at it a long time, and I said, "No, sir, and I think you should sit back down." All right. Here's where it gets ugly, because right then I thought I was home free. CEO of the company on a bucket in my shop looking at a forged document, ready to walk over hot coals for me? That's not how it went. Sokol Marsh has lawyers, 9 of them. Within 4 days, those lawyers did what lawyers do, which is protect the company. And the theory they landed on was so clean, it made me sick. The theory was that I did it. Think about it. Guy owns 3 parcels a developer needs. Forges an option, waits, screams fraud, extorts a bigger price. And the icing was that this same guy claims to be the anonymous hero from a 20-year-old wreck that ran in the newspaper, with a reward attached, which anybody could have read about. And who do you think fed them that? She got there first. Sokol's assistant mentioned to somebody that the boss drove out to Slavic Village, and Whitney is very, very good at her job. She went to general counsel and told them, with tears, that she'd just learned her estranged husband had been contacting her employer, that he drank, that he was capable of this, that she was afraid of him, afraid of me. 11 years, and I never even slammed a door. And Bryce Aldrich sat next to her and backed up every word. Ed called and told me a private investigator had been at the shop asking Tico whether I drank on the job. Tico's 26 and weighs 140 pounds, and he chased that man out of my bay with a chop saw blade in his hand, and I love that kid. But I sat in my truck behind the shop that night thinking, she's going to do it. She's actually going to take my father's building and my name, and she's going to do it in a conference room with a box of tissues. I've never been that low, not when my dad died, not ever. And then on the Friday, Bryce Aldrich came to my shop. Silver Audi parked halfway across the sidewalk. Maybe 40, real good coat. And he stood in my bay door and looked around at the tanks and the racks the way you look into a dumpster. Dan, Bryce, I work with your wife. Now, my phone was in my shirt pocket, and here's the thing about Ohio I didn't know until Ed told me. One-party consent. If I'm in the conversation, I can record it, and I don't have to ask anybody. I hit the button through my shirt before I shook his hand. He gave me a whole speech. Things had gotten complicated, everybody was upset, the company wanted it to go away, and he was authorized to talk about a goodwill number. I said, a number for what? For signing a fresh copy, clean paper, clean date, nobody looks backward. I asked how much, 50, on top of the purchase price. Personal, quiet, not through the company. And I stood there in my father's shop with a grinder in my hand and said, Bryce, did you know I was her husband? He laughed. He actually laughed at me, and he said, and I've got this on my phone. He said, Chief, everybody knew. She just told us you were nobody. Nobody. Then he tapped my workbench twice with his knuckles, like a man checking a used car. Be smart. She's got the whole floor believing you're a drunk. Take the money. I said, get off my property. Take a night. I said it again, and Tico came around the corner with the chop saw still spinning down, and Bryce got in the Audi. I sat on that pallet of angle iron for 20 minutes with 41 minutes of audio in my hand. And you know what saved me? Not the paper. Nina Sokol works at that firm, Design Group, 19th floor. She's the young woman who held the elevator for me and asked if my hands hurt, and neither one of us had any idea. And I've thought about that 100 times since. She was in the room when the lawyers pitched the theory that the man who pulled her out of a burning car was a con man who read about it in the newspaper. And Nina said, ask him what he said to me. And they said, what? And she said, it was never in the paper. Nobody ever printed what he said to me on the ground, because I never told anybody except my dad and my therapist. Ask him. So Gerald called me at 9 at night, and his voice was strange and formal, and I could hear people breathing in the room around him, and he asked me. I sat down on my stairs and said the only thing I remembered saying to a shaking little girl in the snow in 2005. I said, hey, kiddo, look at me. You're done. That was the worst part, and it's over. And I heard a woman start crying on the other end of that phone. That's the receipt. 20 years. 9 words that never left 2 people's heads. The rest was mechanical. Once they believed me, they went looking, and a company that size can look hard. Kendra Voss folded in 6 minutes when General Counsel sat her down. Her journal had an entry for the 4th of February that said, D. Nowak, ID verified, driver's license, and she'd never met me in her life. Whitney told her it was routine, said she'd witnessed it herself. Kendra was 31 with a toddler, and she signed a statement that afternoon. The electronic envelope on that agreement was opened from an IP address at a Hampton Inn in Independence, Ohio. On a Tuesday, 2 in the afternoon, Bryce Aldrich's corporate card paid for the room. And the third federal line of credit was Ed's to run, and the loan officer's file had a copy of a driver's license with my photo on it, photographed off my nightstand. $90,000. Where'd it go? Some of it into a leased Range Rover, some of it into a storage unit in Valley View, full of furniture I'd never seen. The rest went into a down payment on a townhouse in Ohio City, in one name. Hers? She was building the next house with the equity from mine. Okay, the reckoning. I don't want to make this sound like a movie. It wasn't. It was a Thursday, it was raining, and I was wearing a jacket with a broken zipper. 21st floor. That conference room with the lake behind it, gray as concrete. Gerald at the head of the table, General Counsel, 2 partners, and Nina in the corner with her arms crossed and her jaw set, like her father's. They brought Whitney in without telling her I'd be there. She came through that door, mid-sentence, laughing at something, and saw me sitting in a conference chair in a barn jacket with my hands folded, and I watched every ounce of blood leave that woman's face. She said, Danny, what are you doing? And Gerald Sokol said, Sit down, Whitney. She sat. They went through it slow. Counsel read the notary statement out loud. Then the hotel invoice. Then General Counsel set a little black speaker on the table. Mr. Aldrich, on the 11th of April, did you visit Mr. Nowak's place of business? Bryce said, briefly, to de-escalate. She pressed the button. You've never heard a room go that quiet. She played maybe 90 seconds, and there's Bryce's voice, easy and warm, offering me $50,000 under the table for a clean signature on a fresh date. And then, God help him, there it is. Chief? Everybody knew. She just told us you were nobody. Bryce stood up, put his hands flat on the table and said, that was a private conversation. And Ed, who'd said nothing the whole meeting, leaned into the microphone in the middle of the table and said, This is Ohio. Bryce sat back down. He went the color of oatmeal and never said another word. Then they read her email out loud. Erratic. Drinks. Probably won't remember what he agreed to. And she said, That's out of context. Out of context. Everybody who's known me 30 years would tell you I haven't had a drink since 2011. And she said it was out of context. Then Sokol slid one more thing across the table. An 8x10 photograph of a plaid flannel shirt in a plastic evidence bag with a name patch that said, Stan. And he said, Do you know what this is? And she said no. And he said, It's your father-in-law's shirt. Your husband put it around my daughter in the snow on the inner belt in February of 2005 and then drove away without giving anybody his name. Whitney looked at me for a long, long time, and what was in her face wasn't guilt. It was arithmetic. You could see it moving behind her eyes, how she'd have told this story at a dinner table if she'd known. My husband, the one who saved Gerald's daughter. I watched 11 years of my life get priced out in real time. And she said, Danny, why didn't you ever tell me? That's what she said. Not I'm sorry. Not once, not that day, not ever. She asked why I hadn't given her something better to work with, and I said, Because you never once asked me about my hand. 11 years. It's the hand she held. She was terminated for cause that afternoon and walked out by building security at 4:15, which is when everybody's coming back from coffee. She had to walk right past that receptionist who never remembered my name. Bryce was gone by Monday. They let it look like a resignation. He also has a wife, and she found out from the general counsel's paralegal, who I'm told did not enjoy making that call. Last I heard, he sells commercial insurance out of a strip mall in Mentor. He called my shop once, in June. I let it ring. Kendra lost her commission and kept her job because so-called Marsh decided a woman who told the truth in 6 minutes deserved to still have insurance for her kid. I don't have a bad word for her. The county prosecutor's office took the forgery packet, and in Ohio, forging a mortgage instrument is its own animal. Whitney's attorney negotiated. She pled to a lesser count, probation, restitution, and a felony record that follows her into every background check for the rest of her life. I didn't give a victim statement at sentencing. Ed said it might help. I didn't want it. The divorce was almost boring. Ohio's an equitable distribution state, and the shop was my father's, and I inherited it, which makes it separate property. It was never hers, and that's the part I still turn over at 2 in the morning. She didn't have to steal it. She could have sat down at that kitchen table and said, "Danny, they'll pay $600,000, let's take it, and go somewhere warm," and I'd have said yes before she finished the sentence. She got her car, her retirement, and a judgment against her for the $90,000. She did not get the house on East 71st, and she did not get 1 square foot of 3417 Fleet Avenue. Sokol Marsh redesigned the project. Nina redesigned it, actually. They built around me. There's a plaza going in on the corner, and my building sits in the middle of it, ugly red brick, loading door, pigeons. Nina put a bronze plaque up, and it's not my name on it. It says Stanley Nowak Iron Works, East, 1978. And the apprenticeship they run out of the back half of my building, Sokol pays for that. 6 kids from the neighborhood. One of them is Tico's cousin, and she's better at TIG than I was at her age, and she tells me so. Gerald comes by on Thursdays. He's an old man who lost his wife in 2018, and he sits on that bucket drinking coffee out of a styrofoam cup and complaining about his knees while I work. We don't talk about the accident. We talked about it once, all the way through, that first day, and never again. The night it actually ended wasn't the conference room. It was the night after. I came home to the house on East 71st, and it was empty, her stuff gone. And I stood in the kitchen doorway with my keys in my hand for maybe 5 minutes without turning the light on. Then I sat down in my father's chair at that table, the one where she told me I'd embarrass her, and put my head down on my arms like a kid at a desk, and let out a breath that felt like it had been in there since 2005. It was so quiet. That's what I remember. No television, no phone buzzing, no getting ready, sounds upstairs. The refrigerator kicked on, and I laughed out loud, alone, in the dark, because that stupid refrigerator was the soundtrack of the worst thing anybody ever said to me. My shoulders came down about 2 inches, and they never went back up. I'm still in the shop, still on Fleet. Tico runs half the jobs now, and he's better than me on aluminum, which he mentions. There's a woman named Rosalie who owns the bakery on Broadway, and last spring she asked me to fix a railing, then a chair, and by the 4th thing I figured out the railing had been fine. That's as far as I'm going with that. So, what do I know? 11 years, and she never once asked about the scar. I don't think she was being cruel. I honestly don't. She just never wondered, and I've turned that over at 2 in the morning more times than I want to admit, whether there's any real difference, and I still don't have an answer. Maybe there isn't one. I think about that room sometimes. All those tuxedos at the Union Club, Whitney with a glass of wine, sure all the way down to her shoes that the most important man in the building would never in his life want to shake my hand. She had it backwards, and she never knew it, and part of me wishes I'd walked in there in my work coat just to watch. If you're the one sitting in that chair right now, feeling small in your own kitchen, I don't have a speech. I'm a welder. I'll say this much. When somebody needs you smaller so they can look bigger, you can't fix that by getting smaller. I tried it for about 6 years, and I'm not all the way out of it. I still catch myself calling her my wife. I still take my boots off in the garage out of habit, like there's somebody in there who cares. Rosalie says that'll pass. She's probably right. My hands are my Father's hands. That's the one thing I'm sure of. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you next time.